The knock came at 3 in the morning on a Thursday in late October. Not a soft tap, not a doorbell. A fist, heavy and unsteady, hitting the wood in a rhythm that didn't make sense until I heard the voice behind it. "Mom, it's me, please. My name is Margaret Holloway. Most people in Claremont, Georgia call me Judge Holloway, even now, 4 years after I stepped down from the family court bench. I spent 31 years listening to people tell me the truth and watching them try to hide it. I know the difference between a lie and a secret. Lies are built, secrets leak. What I opened my door to that October morning was something that had been leaking for a long time, and I had been too careful not to see it. My son Daniel stood on my porch in a flannel shirt he'd had since college, one arm pressed tight against his ribs, his eyes puffy and red-rimmed. His truck was parked half on the grass, which told me he hadn't trusted himself to park it straight. There was a thin cut above his left eyebrow, already crusted over. He smelled like cold air and something sharper underneath it. I pulled him inside without saying a word. That's what you do when you've spent 3 decades watching people fall apart on a witness stand. You get still, you make space. You don't flood the room with your own reaction before you understand what's happening. He sat on my kitchen stool, and I put a glass of water in front of him. He didn't touch it. I turned on the stove light, the small one, not the overhead, because the overhead can feel like an interrogation, and I didn't want that tonight. I waited. "She pushed me down the stairs," he said. "I think I cracked something. I am 63 years old. I have heard testimonies that would stop your heart. I have presided over custody hearings, where parents described things I still see in my dreams. And in that moment, sitting across from my 34-year-old son at 3 in the morning, I felt something move through me that no amount of professional distance could contain. I breathed through it. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Renata Willis, who had been my neighbor and friend since before Daniel was born. "Renata," I said when she picked up, "I need you to come look at Daniel. Don't bring anyone else." She arrived in 12 minutes in her coat over her pajamas, carrying a bag she kept ready because that is the kind of woman she has always been. She pressed gently along his ribs, shone a light in his eyes, cleaned the cut above his brow with a steadiness that I was grateful for. She told me 2 ribs were likely fractured, maybe cracked, and that the cut didn't need stitches but should be documented. "Documented," I said. She looked at me over her glasses. That's what I said. She took photographs with her phone, careful and methodical, each image time-stamped. She handed me a printed summary before she left, scrawled in her handwriting on a notepad she'd brought. Laceration above left brow, contusions on left side torso, likely rib fractures, consistent with impact from fall or strike. She signed it with her full name and credentials. That piece of paper went into a folder I started before the sun came up. Daniel slept on my couch that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything he had told me, not in the rambling order he'd told it, but structured. What happened, when it happened, what he saw, what he heard, what he could prove. I had done this 10,000 times in a professional capacity. I had never expected to do it for my own child. His wife's name was Vanessa. He had met her 7 years ago at a trade conference in Nashville, where he was trying to grow the landscaping company he'd built from a pickup truck and a bag of tools into something real. She was polished and fast-talking, and she made him laugh in a way that he hadn't since his father died. I had reservations I kept to myself, because Daniel was 30 years old and grief makes people reach for the nearest warmth. I thought it would pass, either the grief or the relationship. Neither did. They married 2 years later. I wore a blue dress and I smiled for every photograph. Over time, things became quieter between them in a way that wasn't peace. Daniel stopped calling as often. When he did, there was a flatness in his voice that I told myself was just the weight of running a business. My daughter-in-law became brisk with me, efficient, like a woman managing an appointment. She spoke over me at holiday dinners and answered questions I had directed at my son. I told myself this was her way. I told myself I was being a difficult mother-in-law. I told myself many things that kept me from seeing clearly. What Daniel told me that night changed the shape of everything. It had started, he said, about 18 months ago. Small things, money moving from the business account to a personal account he didn't fully control, vendor payments that he couldn't trace, his name on contracts he didn't remember signing. When he asked about it, she told him he was confused, that he didn't understand the financial side, that she was handling it and he should focus on the cruise and the clients. She said it gently at first, then less gently. Then one evening she threw a ceramic mug at the wall 6 inches from his head and told him if he kept questioning her, she would tell everyone he was unstable and needed help. The argument that sent him to my porch had started over a bank statement he had finally gotten access to. He had seen a wire transfer of $42,000 to an LLC he had never heard of. When he showed it to her, she told him he was paranoid and needed medication. When he didn't back down, she shoved him at the top of the stairs. He caught the railing with one arm. The other arm hit the wall on the way down. 2 stairs, but enough. I wrote all of this down. I underlined the name of the LLC. The next morning, I drove Daniel to the urgent care clinic 2 towns over, not the one in Claremont, because Claremont is small and Vanessa had friends in small places. The physician's assistant there confirmed 2 cracked ribs and a bone bruise on his forearm. I asked for a full printed record and a disc with the imaging. The young woman behind the desk gave me a look that told me she understood what I was doing. I thanked her quietly. On the drive back, Daniel asked me what I was going to do. "I'm going to look at the business," I said. "Mom, she's already told her friends that I've been having mental episodes. If I come after her." "You're not coming after her," I said. "I am." He went quiet for a moment. Then, "She'll destroy you." I kept my eyes on the road. Let her try. I spent the next 4 days at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee and a legal pad, going through every document Daniel could get me access to without alerting Vanessa. Corporate filings, bank statements going back 3 years, vendor invoices, payroll records. 31 years on the bench had made me fluent in the language of financial deception. I knew what a shell company looked like. I knew what a forged authorization looked like. I knew what it looked like when someone had been running a second set of books with the confidence of a person who believed they would never be caught. The LLC was called Whitmore Property Solutions. It had been registered in Delaware 18 months ago. The registered agent was a woman named Crystal Pace. I did not recognize that name, but I recognized the address listed for the company. It was the address of a real estate office on the east side of Claremont, a small operation that had opened about 2 years ago. I wrote that name down. I circled it 3 times. On the 5th day, I called Franklin Bro, who had been my court clerk for 19 years and now worked in the county recorder's office. I told him I needed to look at some property transfer records. He didn't ask why. He had worked beside me long enough to know that when I said I needed to look at something, it was worth looking at. What we found made my jaw tighten. There was a deed transfer on file for a piece of commercial property Daniel had inherited from his father, a small warehouse on the edge of town he'd been leasing out for extra income since he was 26. According to the filing, Daniel had transferred the property to Whitmore Property Solutions 8 months ago. The notary stamp on the document was from a notary who, according to the state registry, had surrendered her license 14 months prior. It was fraud. Clean, documented, verifiable fraud. Franklin slid the certified copies across the desk and kept his voice low. "Margaret, someone walked this through manually. This didn't go through the normal digital queue." He paused. "Somebody knew how to move it without flags." I thanked him and took the folder to my car. I sat for a moment in the parking lot and looked at my son's signature on a document he had never signed. My ex-husband had bought that property with his own hands when Daniel was 9 years old. He had told Daniel it was his insurance policy, something no one could take from him as long as he paid the taxes and kept it clean. Someone had taken it anyway. I did not drive home. I drove to the office of Marcus Pritchard, an attorney I had watched work for years from the other side of the courtroom. He was sharp and methodical, and he had never once tried to flatter me, which I considered his highest qualification. I spread the documents across his conference table. He read in silence for 11 minutes. Then he looked up. "How much have you told Daniel?" "Enough," I said. How much does she know you know? Nothing yet. He nodded slowly. We need to move before she does. He began listing what we had. The medical records from 2 sources, Renata's documentation, the imaging from urgent care, the financial transfers, the fraudulent deed, the surrendered notary stamp. This is enough for a civil action and a referral to the DA, he said. But I want one more thing if we can get it. Someone who was inside. I already had someone in mind. Her name was Denise Carver. She had worked as Vanessa's bookkeeper for the first 4 years of the marriage, before Vanessa let her go abruptly and without explanation about 14 months ago. Daniel had mentioned her once, offhandedly, saying Denise had seemed upset when she was let go, that Vanessa had replaced her with a remote accounting service that Daniel had never been able to reach by phone. I found Denise through a mutual contact. She was working at a florist's shop on the north side of town. I went in on a Wednesday afternoon and bought a small arrangement of yellow flowers and asked the woman behind the counter if she was Denise Carver. She said yes and looked at me carefully. I told her who I was. She asked me to wait, while she told her manager she needed a break. We sat in her car in the parking lot for 40 minutes. She told me that for the last year of her time with Vanessa, she had been asked to record certain payments under different vendor categories, move line items around in ways that didn't make sense, and process reimbursements to the Whitmore LLC before she even knew what it was. When she had asked Vanessa directly what the LLC was for, Vanessa had smiled at her and said it was a holding company for some personal investments, and that it was none of Denise's concern. A month later, Denise was let go with 2-week severance and a non-disclosure agreement she had signed because she was scared and needed the money. Is that agreement still binding? She asked me. That's a question for Marcus Pritchard, I said, but I can tell you that NDAs don't protect fraud. They never have. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I kept copies of everything. I didn't know why at the time. I just knew something was wrong. I looked at her steadily. Denise. That instinct may have saved my son's life. She nodded. Her hands were shaking slightly in her lap. What do I need to do? Tell the truth, I said. That's all. The week that followed was one of the most deliberate weeks of my life. Marcus filed for an emergency protective order for Daniel, citing the documented physical assault and the ongoing financial threat. A judge I had known for 20 years signed it the same afternoon. It barred Vanessa from accessing the business accounts or any property in Daniel's name while the matter was under review. That evening, my phone rang. It was Vanessa. Her voice was smooth and measured, the way it always was when she wanted something. She told me she knew I had been talking to people, that I was interfering in a private matter, that Daniel was struggling emotionally and needed professional help, not his mother stirring things up. She said she hoped I understood what I was risking by getting involved. I let her finish. Then I said, I've heard a lot of people try to explain their way out of evidence, Vanessa. It never goes the way they think it will, and I ended the call. The rumors started the next day. Claremont is a town of 20,000 people, which means it is a town where everyone has a cousin who works somewhere important. By that weekend, I had heard 3 different versions of the story. That Daniel was having a breakdown, that I had manipulated him into leaving his wife, that I was using my former position to bully a woman who had done nothing wrong. At church on Sunday, a woman I had known for 15 years gave me a look across the parking lot that I understood immediately. I smiled at her and kept walking. The truth about gossip is that it has a shelf life. Evidence does not. 2 weeks after the protective order, we had our hearing. The courtroom was smaller than the ones I had presided over, but the weight in the room was familiar. Daniel sat beside Marcus in a gray shirt, his posture careful because of his ribs. I sat in the gallery, which was the hardest thing I had done in years, sitting on the other side of the bench, watching instead of presiding. But I had been told it would matter more if the court saw me as a mother, not a former judge. Marcus had been right about most things so far. Vanessa arrived with her attorney, a man named Harold Sims, who I knew by reputation as someone who worked best with clients who had money and plausible deniability. She was dressed in muted gray, understated, composed. She did not look at me when she sat down. Marcus opened with the medical records. Renata took the stand first, steady and precise, walking through the photographs she had taken that morning in my kitchen. The bruising on Daniel's side, the cut above his brow, her clinical assessment. She did not embellish. She didn't need to. The urgent care records followed. The imaging. The physician's assistant's written notes. Harold Sims tried to suggest Daniel had fallen while intoxicated. Marcus asked for the blood draw results that had been taken at urgent care as a routine precaution. Daniel's BAC had been 0. Then came the financial evidence. Franklin Bro testified about the property deed, the invalid notary stamp, the irregular processing pathway. The certified documents were entered into evidence 1 page at a time. Harold Sims objected repeatedly. The judge overruled him each time, with the kind of quiet economy that told me she had seen this before. When Denise took the stand, the room shifted. She was calm. She had clearly made a decision about who she was in that room, and she held it. She described what she had been asked to do with the books, the Whitmore transfers, the pressure to stay quiet, the non-disclosure agreement she had signed under duress. She had brought her own copies of the records she had kept, organized in a folder with tabs. Marcus entered them into evidence. Harold Sims's cross-examination went nowhere because Denise had not guessed at anything. She had only described what she had seen and what she had done. Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time when Marcus read aloud the total amount that had been transferred out of the business accounts and into Whitmore Property Solutions over 18 months. It was just under $230,000. The sound she made was small, involuntary. Like something slipping. Harold Sims asked for a recess. The judge gave him 15 minutes. It didn't help. By the time both sides had finished, the room was very quiet. The judge took a short recess herself, and when she returned, she read her ruling in the measured tone of someone who has organized her thoughts and will not be rushed. The protective order was made permanent. Vanessa was barred from contact with Daniel and from any access to the business or its assets. The property transfer to Whitmore Property Solutions was voided, and the warehouse was restored to Daniel's name pending a full title review. All of Vanessa's personal and business accounts were frozen pending investigation. The matter was referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential charges including domestic battery, financial fraud, and forgery. As the deputies approached Vanessa to inform her of the immediate restraints on her movement and finances, I watched her face go through several expressions before landing on something blank and disbelieving. She had built this carefully, methodically, over years. She had believed she was smarter than the people around her. That kind of belief is very hard to surrender all at once. Daniel did not cry. He sat very still for a long moment after the gavel came down. Then he turned to Marcus and shook his hand. Then he turned and found me in the gallery. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was small and had just discovered that something frightening was actually survivable. I nodded at him. That was enough. Recovery does not follow a schedule, and I say that, having watched hundreds of people try to impose one on it. In the weeks after the hearing, Daniel moved into my guest room while his attorneys worked through the business accounts and the full scope of what had been taken. There were nights he sat at my kitchen table and stared at documents until his eyes were blank, trying to understand how he had missed it. I sat with him on those nights, not talking, mostly, just present. One evening he said, "You had reservations about her, from the beginning, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "You never said anything. You were grieving your father, and you were in love," I said. "There are limits to what a mother should put in the way of that." He was quiet. Then he said, "I should have trusted you." I put my hand on his arm. "You trusted yourself. That's what got you out of that house and onto my porch. That's not nothing." He started seeing a counselor in November, a man named Dr. Keith Abrams, who specialized in financial trauma and coercive control. He told me after his third session that he'd never thought of what had happened to him as a pattern, only as isolated incidents. The counselor was helping him see the pattern. He said it felt like putting on glasses for the first time, everything sharp and slightly unreal. By December, He was back at the business full-time. He hired a new bookkeeper, a retired CPA named Wendell who had been recommended by Marcus, and set up an oversight structure that required 2 signatures on any transfer over $500, small but solid, the kind of foundation you build when you've seen what happens without one. As for Denise, I called her the week after the hearing. She said the florist shop had given her a raise and that she was sleeping better than she had in 2 years. I thought she told me she had been carrying the guilt of having helped, even unknowingly, for a long time. I told her that the moment she sat down in Marcus's office and organized her files into tabbed folders was the moment she stopped helping. She laughed a little at that. I want to say something directly to anyone who recognizes pieces of Daniel's story in their own life, whether you are the one being hurt, or whether you are standing on the outside watching someone you love disappear into a situation they can't name yet. Financial abuse is real, and it is common, and it does not always look like what you expect. It often arrives wrapped in competence. A partner who handles the money because they're so good with numbers, a spouse who takes over the accounts to reduce your stress, a person who tells you that you are confused, that you don't understand how money works, that they are doing all of this for you. The isolation builds slowly, and by the time you see the full picture, you are already outside the frame. If you are in this situation, the first step is documentation, and it costs nothing but time and attention. Screenshot bank statements. Email yourself copies of anything financial. Write down dates, amounts, conversations. These small actions are the beginning of a record that cannot be undone. If there has been physical harm, go to a doctor. Even a minor injury documented properly is evidence. Ask explicitly for printed records and imaging. Tell the staff exactly what happened. You do not have to file a police report that day to benefit from medical documentation. If you suspect property or business fraud, contact your county recorder's office and request copies of any transfers made in your name in the last 2 to 3 years. A notary's credentials can be verified through your state's licensing board. These are public records. You have the right to see them. And if you need legal help and cannot afford it, legal aid societies exist in almost every county in this country. Family law attorneys often offer free consultations. The National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 serves people experiencing financial abuse as well as physical abuse. You do not have to be bruised to call. You do not have to have proof before you reach out. You just have to be willing to say out loud that something is wrong. That is the hardest part. Not because people won't believe you, but because saying it out loud makes it real, and real is frightening when you've spent so long hoping you were wrong. You are not wrong. When I look back at that October morning, I don't think about the courtroom or the gavel or the sound of the accounts being frozen. I think about my son standing on my porch at 3 a.m, one arm pressed against his ribs, finally done trying to carry it alone. I think about how long it must have taken him to drive those 12 miles. How many times he must have started and stopped and talked himself out of it. He got here. That was the bravest thing. I put on my reading glasses that night and opened my legal pad and wrote down everything he told me. Not because I was a judge, because I was his mother. And because some promises don't need to be spoken out loud to be iron. If this story reached you, leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. You'd be surprised how much it helps to know that someone, somewhere, is listening. And if any part of what Daniel went through feels close to home, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Silence only protects the people who are depending on it. Speaking up is not easy. But it is the first door, and once you open it, the next one is a little lighter.